In the land of the dead, heck boy, ain't grand. More old world news, and this time we're looking at his development diary. Walk like a Nehekharan in the land of the dead. So let's see what Rob has in store for us. In our previous article, we looked at the very heart of the old world, the Empire of Man. What we found was a realm both familiar to fans of Warhammer, but also subtly different. Not the unified nation you might remember from Warhammer Fantasy Battle. This time we're going to look at something... excuse me, I don't know what's wrong with me today. This time we're going to take a look at something that will be extremely familiar to longtime fans. The land of the dead, and the tyrannical rule of Settra, the imperishable, the undying king of Kemari. The supreme monarch of Nehekara and the other tomb kings are going to be major players in the stories we will tell in Warhammer, the Old World. And it has been wonderful to come back to them after all these years. They're not technically denizens of the Old World, but their invasions play a key part in the narrative at this time during the history of the setting. Now we have some more information from Jonathan, but let's see what else it says. Settra has been a prominent character in Warhammer for a long time, but what interest does he have in the lands of the living and the people of the Old World? And Jonathan responds, in life Settra expanded the borders of Nehekara until his realm stretched far beyond the horizon. Eastwards and westwards, his legions marched across deserts and mountains until they reached distant coast, and to the north, his dominion included the lands now known as the Empire in Bretonia. In the years that followed his death, lesser monarchs lacked the will and ambition to maintain such a massive kingdom, and over centuries it shrank to a shadow of its former glory. When Settra awoke from death, following the great necromancer's diabolical ritual, his wrath was unmatched. Not only had the Lich priests failed to return him to an eternally youthful body, but his dynasty had crumbled to insignificance in his absence. Since that day, Settra has been plotting the reconquest of the lands that were once his, and the subjugation of the usurper kings, queens, and emperors who dare rule in his stead. No doubt we will see these plans of conquest set into motion when the time is right. Can you give us any clues? Whoa, that was hard. That was loud. Excuse me, I have to do something before I continue so that doesn't happen again. Okay, can you give us any clues about how Tomb King's army will wage war upon the denizens of the Old World? We've taken a great deal of care to make the undead work. It was vital that the rules represent balanced game mechanics while invoking the frightening image of rank upon rank of skeleton warriors marching in unison, as chariots speed towards the enemy flanked by monstrous constructs animated by the ancient magic of the mortuary cults. You'll be able to wield the powers of a Lich priest once more, commanding skeletal hordes to arise from their tombs and march upon the lands of the living. We see a pretty nice image here. With Settra's attention seemingly fixed upon foreign affairs, will we get much chance to explore the land of the dead itself? Our main focus is going to be on the role that Settra and the Tomb Kings of Kemari played in the Old World, but there's nothing to stop us returning to Nehekara in the future. There are plenty of instances of Tomb Kings waging war on one another while Settra's attention was elsewhere, and that's before we even get started on raiders and invaders from far-off lands. Many have scoured the blistering deserts of Nehekara in search of ancient treasures, some hoping to stumble upon wealth beyond imagination, while others sought long-forgotten secrets or legendary artifacts worth far more than gold. Now let's talk a little about this whole article while I go through the images again. Okay, it looks interesting. The artwork really works, but you can't really complain about that most of the time. It works. It represents what it's supposed to be, the skeletons and skeleton warriors. I like the shields on this guy. I like both their shields, in fact. even this more plain one compared to this decorated one, we see that one has a pole arm of sorts, maybe even a spear, if you will, and one has a sword. What's interesting is that they took a nice design from the Egyptian khopesh, the sword that's kind of curved around and it comes like in this hilt here. But of course the sword, the khopesh, whatever, is more rounded than this. It's not as straight like this, because this has the look of a normal blade. Okay, the sword nerd in me is a little bit coming out, but I don't really think this was an effective way of things to look. I think the khopesh design is way better for what it was used for, the whole curved thing going forward, than trying to have this straight blade like it's a normal European sword, or like a sword you would see in Britannia or the Empire, to be more exact in this case. And it really feels weird, and it looks like it can break easily, excluding the fact that they look like they're rusted, like they have rust on them, which I give a point. It's an interesting point for the design. It works with the design because they're supposed to be undead and everything, and it works to give them those rusted looking blades. But it's not really that efficient. I think the spear, as cool as it looks like this, would look even better if it was like the khopesh. But I understand what they wanted to do with this whole pole arm, to have like a pointy bit, while the khopesh doesn't really have the pointy bit part. We can see they also gave the sword some three spikes. That's just for design, just for the rule of cool. Can't really say anything about that design. Okay, so we know we're not really gonna deal that much with Nehekara, the land of the dead, but we know that Settra will play a role in the coming old world, which is gonna be interesting. It makes sense, since this is kind of based on that what was again, that Diablo clone that's in Warhammer Fantasy during the reign of Magnus. It makes sense because one of those DLCs for that game is in Nehekara. It's basically in the whole desert place. So it works. I like it. I like this thing. Again, we have seen this image here that this guy also has the same motif going for him with the spear, though it is a little bit more interesting because it looks better put together, should I say, as a pole arm rather than what the skeleton had. But I guess he's also a more higher ranked thing. We can also see he has a tail, which is interesting. And at the end of the tail, there's this thing which I think is also going to be a weapon that he can use, because it looks like one of those old, I think it was Aztec, in fact, pole arms or weapons then that were kind of heavy at the head of it. So that's pretty interesting. The design is interesting. In itself, it looks more like a bug man, but I think there's like a skeleton. If you look closely, you can probably see that he has eyes here, which points to it. It looks kind of cool. We also have this rendition of the map where we see the land of the dead. When we see where Kemari is, we also see some other fascinating places that I can't read. But the main focus is going to be Kemari. Some more other places around here. But Settra is going to be interesting. I am a little bit intrigued by this whole thing, since Necromancer, Kemari armies are pretty cool in my opinion. I think this has potential, and the old world is shaping up to be something pretty interesting. Again, I like Settra, and I like this whole design of this guy. It just looks amazing to me. No? That's gonna be all for now. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next one.